Hello, and welcome to part two of our three-part series on PMP test preparation, or what I wish I would have known while preparing for the PMP. In part one, we went over the general test. So what can you expect out of the process, the general test-taking process? In the second part, we're going to go over the actual test. What kind of questions can you expect to see on the test, how to interpret them, and just figure out what it is you should be focusing on. In part three, we're going to go over the actual PMP material. So who am I? I'm Stephen Mitchell. I've recently obtained my PMP, and these are just hopefully helpful hints, things that it took me a while before I had that aha moment to figure it out, and hopefully it helps you streamline your test preparation process and save you some time. So let's jump right into it. So we have 7 bullets right here we're going to go through. Hopefully this helps you out. One, you will see a lot of questions on the test that ask you, what should you do next? They're going to give you a scenario and ask you, what's the next thing you should do as a project manager? So first of all, you take all your experience and you can put it right here. Let me tell you why. The answer to that question has absolutely nothing to do with how you approach that situation in your experience. The PMP or the PMBOK is a set of rules or standards that are globally recognized on how projects should be done. This is a step-by-step procedure. It doesn't mean that in your experience you did the wrong thing. It just means that in the experience that you've had, you may not have done it per what the PMBOK states. So what should you do next? What is it really asking? And in a lot of examples, what you should do next is more than one answer provided. And that's one thing that you may have to just slow down and think about the question. This is a correct answer, and this is also a correct answer. So what indeed should I do next? Well, the what should you do next questions, and if you've already started studying, this will look very familiar to you. They all have to do with this map. This is the knowledge area and process group map. So what you should do next, the key to answering those questions is to figure out where in the process you are. Are you here? Are you here? Are you here? Are you here? Because everything, as you know, has an input, a tool and technique, and an output. So in part one, we talked about how you should use your flashcards if you choose to use them. This is why you cannot use your flashcards for this. So what you should do next requires you to identify where you are here, where is the output of that process. The question is going to give you clues about where you are in the project, and you need to understand where the output goes. The second question is the exact same question. What should you have done? They'll give you a scenario and tell you that something went wrong. You need to go back and figure out what should have happened or what should you have done to prevent that situation from happening. Exact same question. Don't get it confused. Where are you in the process? What is the input to that process? You needed input of 1, 2, and 3, or A, B, and C. You have input 1 and 2, but not 3. You have input A and B, but not C. You should have corrected that before you were at this point in the project. So they're very similar types of questions, and the only way to really get those correct, I say unfortunately or fortunately, is just to learn this sheet and understand the concepts. Where are things going? How do they flow? How everything just kind of mixes together. So as soon as you understand that that's what the question is asking, the better equipped you'll be to answer it correctly. Number 3, read the last line first. And what do I mean by this? You'll find very quickly that on the actual test, a lot of questions are wordy. It's just a lot of words to decipher, and the PMP test is notorious for giving you erroneous data that you really do not need. It has absolutely nothing to do with the question that's being asked. Half the battle sometimes is figuring out what is the question that I should be answering. Reading the last statement first is one way to save time, but it takes practice to gain confidence that that indeed is what you should be doing. Three things are going to happen when you read the last statement first. The first thing is the last statement will be a standalone question. The last statement could be, you have a SPI of 0.8 and a CPI of 1.1. What does this mean? And the answers are you're behind schedule, behind budget, you're ahead of schedule, ahead of budget, and all the different combinations that they can put. Therefore, if you read the last statement first and it's a standalone question, that's your guarantee almost that all the information in that paragraph of a question they gave you is nothing. And the actual question is a standalone question. You can read that and practice that in your practice test. Don't take my word for it. You need to gain confidence and know when you're taking that question, okay, this is the one that I'm going to read the last statement first. Write it down. That was question 13 or that was question 41. Come back and see if you got it right, if you got it wrong. The second thing that's going to happen when you read the last question first is it's going to tell you what information you need from that paragraph. So if the last question is similar to what is the CPI, that's not a standalone question. It's something that you need to go back into the paragraph. But what will happen is when you read the question now, your brain and your eyes are going to pick out that information that you know the question is asking you. So out of this is, oh, that has to deal with the CPI. Oh, that has to deal with that. You save time and you've only picked out the information you need to answer that question. And last, the thing that's going to happen when you read the last statement first is it will indeed tell you that you need all of the information from this paragraph. Those will most likely be questions like, what should you do next? What should you have done to prevent this? In that case, they're asking you and giving you a lot of context clues on where you are in this process. Therefore, you need to see, okay, yeah, I need to know every single detail. And now you need to pick those context clues out. Now, you have not wasted any time by going back to read the question, because what would you have done otherwise? You would have started from the beginning and read the entire paragraph of the question. In this case, you read the last sentence, you now know that you need to spend time on every word, and you went back and read the beginning until that point. You didn't spend any extra unneeded time. In the other two examples, you saved time. You read the last statement, it was a standalone question, you move on. You read the last statement, you picked out the bits and pieces you need from the paragraph, and you moved on. So the worst thing that can happen is you spend enough time on the question that you would have anyway. So it's definitely something you should take into consideration and try to practice going forward. True statements. Watch out for true statements. What do I mean by this? It's a tricky test. No bones about it. Don't get confused with true statements. You really, truly need to understand what the question is asking. And here's the best overly exaggerated, overly simplified example that I can give. So, what manufacturer, this is a totally made up question, what manufacturer has designed the car with the fastest acceleration for commercial use? The Lamborghini Diablo, the Ferrari Italia, the Toyota Supra, or the Kia Sorento? So you would look at that question and say, okay, there's always one option that I know I can throw out. So the Kia Sorento probably does not have the fastest acceleration time out of this group of answers. So you cross that out. Good for you. If you Google this or you do some research on it, the Toyota Supra is actually the NASCAR version that Toyota makes for racing. So you would kind of hone in on that option and say, well, that's for NASCAR. It's got to have the fastest acceleration time out of the options. So, yeah, I think Toyota Supra is the correct answer. Well, it was a trick and you fell for it. Because the Toyota Supra, because it's for NASCAR, is not a commercial car. You can't go buy one and drive it. So the options that you're left with are only the Lamborghini Diablo and the Ferrari. Those are the only two commercially used cars, commercial cars that you can buy and drive on the street. So what they've done is they've thrown a wrench in there. They've given you a true statement. Although it's true, it did not answer the question that was being asked. And so, one of the things you can do to not waste time, remember part one, you have to figure out what your 57 seconds is. In your 57 seconds, you have to optimize the time. And part of it that you can waste is answering a true statement that may joggle up your interpretation of the question. So, make sure you don't get confused by true statements and figure out what the question is asking. Number 5, the best answer. And what I mean by this is a lot of times, like I said, you'll be able to cross out one thing that's obviously the wrong answer, and another thing you'll be able to cross out. You're left with 2 correct statements. So what would you do next? What does the best answer mean? That's kind of where my research stopped. It just said, you may have 2 answers that are correct. Choose the best one. Well, if it was that easy, I wouldn't be having problems with it. Well, what is the best answer? The best answer could be it could be a lot of things, but let me give you what the top 2 things are, and I'll give you an example. Here's a scenario. You are giving a presentation to senior execs, and you wake up late that day because your alarm clock didn't go off. As you leave, you pull out your driveway and you see that your house is on fire. You have 3 options in this case. Number 1, you can speed to work and get to the presentation on time. Number 2, you can go to work at the normal speed and be about 10 minutes late for this major presentation. Option 3 is you can address the house fire, call the fire department, and wait to see if they put it out. I'm sure that all of us would agree that option 3 is the way to go. But let's take a step back. Option 1, although you thought that may be a good option because you arrived to the presentation on time, is not actually the correct option. You can throw it out because it requires you to speed. Speeding is against the law. The PMBOK will never ask you to do something that is against the rules or regulations or standards of the PMBOK. So although option 1 got you to the presentation on time, it's not a correct solution because you had to do something wrong to get that outcome. So we only have 2 options left. Now, I'm sure all of us can agree that the third one is the thing to do, but why? Why is that the correct thing to do? Because it is the most pressing item that needs to be addressed at this moment. You wouldn't leave your burning house to go to this important meeting, even if you were late, even if you were on time. In this overly exaggerated, oversimplified example, it's very clear that the option that is correct is the one that is the most pressing at that time. So let's see how this relates back to the test. You've got 2 options. Both of them are correct. Which one is the most pressing that has to be done first? So the best answer is what should be done first. Doesn't mean that the second thing doesn't need to be done. Doesn't mean that it doesn't need to be addressed. It just doesn't need to happen first. The second overly exaggerated, overly simplified example I'll give is I'm walking down the street. In my right hand, I have a bag of money, $1,000. In my left hand, I have $10,000. 2 people come up to me and rob me. The guy on the right runs right, the guy on the left runs left. What do you do? Which bag do you go after? I'm sure we can all agree that you're going to run after the guy who has the $10,000. Why? Because that has the most impact. That is the answer. Running after the guy with $10,000 is the most impact rather than running on the guy who has $1,000 and you just left with $1,000. So let's go back and how this relates to the PMP test. You've got two answers, both of them are correct. Both of them should be carried out. Which one has the greatest impact on the project? That is most likely the correct answer, or that's at least how you should approach those two answers. So you've got, what is the best answer? Well, it's the one that has the most impact and or the one that needs to be done immediately. Now, there's some other ways, maybe options 3, 4, and 5 on how to approach it, but those are going to be probably the biggest two where you can weed out or decipher between those two options that are both correct. Okay? 6, wrong answers. Wrong answers are on the test. And let me give you this example. This is a totally made up example, but let's use an equation. In parentheses, 2 plus 5 times 3. Well, the answer, the correct way to work this out, 2 plus 5 is 7. Times 3 equals 21. Let's say, and this is made up, let's say the most common way that people make an error on this equation is they would multiply the 5 and the 3 first. Doesn't mean that's true, but let's say, for example, it's 60% of the people who do this problem would make that mistake. They would get an answer of 3 times 5 is 15. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm making a mistake myself. It said plus. Let's say they would get 3 times 5 is 15, 2 plus 15 is 17. You better believe that 17 is going to be an answer on the test. So if you are one of the 60% of the people who would do it the wrong way, don't stop just because you got the number 17. Don't get a false sense of security that because the answer you came up with is on the test. Really, really make sure that you understand the equations or the question or whatever it is, because the most probable wrong answer is on the test. Let's say in some way, shape, or form, other people would do that equation incorrectly. They would get the answer 15. 15, 17, and 21 will all be potential answers. So some people like to take the answer and work their way back. Maybe that's a solution that will confirm that you did it wrong, but the gist of it is make sure that you know the process, because you may think you got it right because you saw the answer, but they are very intentional in they're putting the wrong answer on the test. So make sure you know it and you know it well. Last, equal value. What is your 57 seconds, as we talked about in part 1? 200 questions, each of them is worth 1 point. That's it. Whether you thought it was easy, whether you thought it was hard, whether you took 30 seconds to answer it, or whether you took 5 minutes to answer it, it's still worth 1 point. So you need to remember that. Don't spend too much time on a question, because you would then be wasting time on other questions that you could have potentially gotten correct. Mark it, move on. That's it. Don't spend, what is your 57 seconds? Figure out what that is and move on. Don't waste too much time on one question. Also, you can always come back, because like I said in part 1, we came up with a formula that gave you time in the test to come back and review all the questions. So just remember, they're all worth equal value. Focus on the ones that you know you can get. 2-part questions also. Going back to this for a second, you may have an equation where it takes 2 parts to answer it. Most people may stop at part 1 before they go to part 2. The part 1 answer will be there. Even in the example where you may need to stop on the first part, and some people may continue going to the second part, the second part answer will be there. So in recap, what do you do next and what should you have done to prevent it? They all go back to where are you on this chart. what is the input, what's the tool and technique, what's the output, or however you want to use it, but you need to figure out where you are, which takes a lot of practice, but it can be done to answer those types of questions. Read the last line first. It'll save you a lot of time. As we talked about in part one, it is not easy to catch up time on the exam. This is one way to catch up time if you don't spend wasted effort reading information that doesn't help you answer the question. True statements, watch out for them. They're on the test. Don't get it mixed up in your evaluation of crossing out different options. The best possible answer, remember what has the biggest impact and what needs to be done first. Wrong answers are on the test, watch out for them, and every question is of equal value. So hopefully these 7 quick steps have helped you with the types of questions you will see on the exam and how to approach them the best and make the best use of your effort. So in part 3, we're going to go over the PMP test material itself, how to break it down, how to understand it, and what tools do you have at your disposal to learn the material. So hopefully this was helpful, and we'll see you in part 3. Thank you.